And you can begin whenever you unmute yourself, Rabbi.
Well, I was going to start with Avi's question, which was on my phone and I lost it. Hold on a second. Don't know why. Well, hello, everybody. Nice to have you back. And if we were sitting around the synagogue, I would be serving coffee and cornbread, corn muffins. On the other hand, we wouldn't be meeting because we would have canceled because of the snow. So here is obviously one of the advantages, small advantages of Zoom. This is such a wise and smart group. I got questions before I even said anything. So they were totally perceptive in anticipating what I was going to talk about. So I already got 2 questions. So let me try to answer them. So Avi asked, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact question, but more or less what Avi said was, when we learned last week about the mitzvot, Maimonides talked a lot about interactions as a community as opposed to an individual, and was the leverage on the side of doing the mitzvot as a community as opposed to the individual observing and carrying out the mitzvot. Is that more or less the question, Avi?
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully by the end of the day today, we'll have a good answer to that. And the answer is no. Or at least he lives in both worlds. The whole point of today is going to be to show the import of the personal observance of mitzvah as the ultimate goal of how you get close to God. So it's not for the community to get close to God, but it's for you to get close to God and for me to be close to God as individuals. I think it's fair to say he operates in both worlds, but not at all to the exclusion of the personal chiyuv, or the personal obligation to observe mitzvot. And remember, I picked out these particular quotations to sort of use as a study guide. So it's not the whole corpus of materials, but he clearly is looking for the individual experience of God. That's the goal. The goal is to live in relationship with God and be passionate about God. And it's not about an intellectual experience. That's the steps, but it's to be attached to God, which sounds a lot like Kabbalah and has similarities to that. Yes, Avi.
I mean, Jerry might be able to help me because he was, I think, in the same class, the Talmud class that I was in. And we were discussing property law in the Talmud. And this question came up about how they saw fairness, how they saw what should be done when there's theft of one kind. And being newer to the study, I was struck by the fact that they didn't so much worry about making the person who had his cow or whatever whole. It wasn't about that. It was more about trying to find a way to make the whole community whole and to find a way to bring that person who had stolen back into the fold. And even if the person who had lost the cow or whatever it happened to be, what ended up not being completely whole, the community as a whole it seemed as if the argument was, let's make all of us together part of the holy community connected to God, even if the individual isn't getting fairness as 20th century or 21st century Americans would see it.
So I would answer that question on a number of different levels. Number one, the Talmudic discussion is very often on a theoretical level as opposed to a practical halachic level. You got to look someplace else for the actual practical application of the halakha. I think you'd find other texts in the Talmud that would argue the opposite. And you would also find talking about property law is going to be different than talking about ritual law or ethical law or the other domains. So again, without looking at the specific text, I would say, yeah, there's a lot in property law that's communal as opposed to private, but there's certainly both there that need to be balanced out. Let's move to your second question, Avi, which in a way was similar. All right, which, or I'm going to make it similar. How's that? You asked that there is the Pirkei Avot statement that study leads to action. And where is essentially Maimonides on that front? Would he prefer theory and study, or would he prefer action? I think that's a pretty fair rephrase of your question. In my introduction, I did not say a whole lot about Maimonides' personal life. So not only was he a practicing physician, he was also Ras El HaYehud. He was the head of the Jewish community. That by itself would have been a full-time job. He was the physical, and we have his letters in which he answered very minute questions. He was also the head separately of a Beit Midrash, which was kind of like a yeshiva gedola, of a big study group. Some of the very practical consequences of later Jewish law were based on decisions that Maimonides made. One that stands out in particular was his using communal funds of the Jewish community of Egypt to ransom captives wherever they were. He considered that a particularly important mitzvah. There's nothing theoretical about that. Somebody's life was at stake. So he actually dealt hands-on with communal activity and communal life. You know, he was one of those rare birds who could live in all of those worlds simultaneously. Working at as a physician, he wasn't looking at the Talmud. He was reading the Greek physicians in Arabic literature as to how to be a doctor. And then he wrote an often quoted medical text in Arabic as a physician's physician. He wasn't a low-level physician. He was a high-level physician. But as I said, he wasn't the chief physician to the Caliph. He was Ras El Yahud. He was the head of the Jewish community, working as the head of the Jewish community, setting budgets, putting fines, putting people in the cherem. We have all his letters. We have lots of his letters from the Geniza in Cairo. And then at 10 o'clock at night, he wrote this book. He wrote a theoretical work of philosophy trying to reconcile Judaism and Greek philosophy. So he lived in all those worlds at the same time. Okay. Avi, we're going to share a text, and I'm going to nominate you to read because I did all the talking. Now you have to do some of the talking. Is that fair?
Fair enough.
And you did such a good job last time. So let's, John, share that first text.
Can you all see it? Can you see the text?
I see it.
Yes.
All right, should I start reading?
Yes, please.
Okay, the commandments. There is a group of human beings who consider it a grievous thing that causes should be given for any law. What would please them most is that the intellect would not find a meaning for the commandments and prohibitions.
Okay, let's stop there. It's called Tamei and Mitzvot, finding reasons for the commandments. Why would someone not want to find a reason for a commandment? Yeah,
I can
Jerry?
answer. Okay. Well, I went to yeshiva and I was always told there are no, you should not look for answers. The reason is that when you find an answer for a commandment, for instance, kashrut, that answer can change over time because what you think is, as an example, unhealthy now may not be considered unhealthy later.
Perfect. Perfect. If you give a reason, if you're a parent and you give a reason for, and somebody argues it, right? If you find a reason and you can dispute the reason, you ultimately going to dispute the ruling. Don't go there. Don't go there. Maimonides said, go there. Okay.
What compels them to feel thus is a sickness that they find in their souls.
He's never kind. He goes right for the jugular.
For they think that if those laws were useful in this existence and had been given to us for this or that reason, it would be as if they derived from the reflection and the understanding of some intelligent being.
Right. So it means it would have a human source, not a divine source.
If, however, there is a thing for which the intellect could not find any meaning at all, and that does not lead to something useful, it indubitably derives from God.
Mind-blowing. First of all, I love the word indubitably. Just in general, I love that word, right? But so if you don't find a reason, and he says, no way, that's a sickness. Find a reason. Okay, let's skip this next one. Let's go to the one that's inasmuch as God.
Inasmuch as God, may he be exalted, knew that the commandments of this law will need in every time and place, so far as some of them are concerned, to be added to or subtracted from, according to the diversity of places, happenings, and conjunctures of circumstances, he forbade adding them or subtracting from them, saying, Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. For this might have led to the corruption of the rules of the law and to the belief that the latter did not come from God.
So here, he's not talking about the reasons anymore. He's not talking about the reasons. He's talking about the ultimate authority of the law. If you say that you can promulgate new laws, or you can say that this law is no longer in operation, then that questions the person who gave the law. That questions the authority. That questions God. Therefore, the laws are set. This is it. We may now figure out, declare what they are, but we're not going to come up with new laws. And we're also going to observe all of the laws. This statement is no longer about Tamei and Mitzvot. This is about authority. And he wants to make sure that the authority of the mitzvot are never lost. Okay, now we're going to go to this third paragraph, which is the transition from the subject we started with last time, mitzvot, to the category or the subject of today, which is perfection, personal fulfillment, and how you get close to God ultimately. Okay, please.
Know that all the practices of the worship, such as reading the Torah, prayer, and the performance of the other commandments have only the end of training you to occupy yourself with his commandments, may he be exalted, rather than with matters pertaining to this world. From here on, I will begin to give you guidance with regard to the form of this training, so that you should achieve this great end.
Okay, it's enough. All right. Matters pertaining to this world. The purpose of the mitzvot, again, this is going to be my transition to a whole long conversation about this, but the purpose of the mitzvot and the purpose of training to do the mitzvot, a little bit at a time, and more and more and more and more, is to empty us of our connection to this world. How to let go of all of our anxieties and aspirations, all of the things that hold us to this world. We need to let go of it in order to get close to God. So, and you need training for it because we're not perfect. We need to get to a destination. And we got to work our entire lives to get to that destination. He'll later say that some people were perfect, like the prophets and like Moses, but not us. So we need training. We need training. And part of that training are the mitzvot. Okay, so let's just hold there for a second and let me invite any questions, suggestions, observations so far. And John, if you see something in the chat or something.
Is this an attempt? Oh, go ahead, Avi.
No, you go ahead.
Is this an attempt to diminish the self, kind of like an entry into a meditative state, that type of thing? Or it sounds Eastern kind of to me.
Well, I don't know enough about Eastern philosophy to go into that in depth, but part of the answer is absolutely yes. Right? There is a whole debate about whether or not Maimonides was actually a mystic. And most scholars come down on the side of no. But he had a deep influence on early Kabbalistic thinking, particularly Abraham Abulafia, because of this need to get in touch with yourself and to leave behind all of these connections to this world. And now we're going to go on a whole journey. We're going to see more steps exactly about that. That the ultimate goal is not mitzvot, and the ultimate goal is not intellectual perfection, about which he writes at great length about. But the end goal is attachment to God. We're going to see when we're going to go on his journey in a moment. And I'm going to take you through all his steps. But the ultimate step, the ultimate place to get to is attachment to God. It's not study, it's not philosophy, it's attachment to God. So I guess that sounds a little Eastern, but I guess ultimately they all have the same goal. Avi?
Yeah, I think I was going to ask the same question, just in a little bit different terms, that it seemed like that would lead to a monastic kind of vision as the goal. And I've always learned that our goal is not to be monastic. So it does seem counter, at least to my understanding of what's central to Judaism.
Well, my understanding of Maimonides is that that's the struggle. And we're going to see this. Actually, the next paragraph that I'm going to share is going to talk more about this. Talk about, actually, I'm not going to answer the question now. Let's read the next text because it's right on this point. Okay, let's go back to the screen share. Same document, John. Scroll up. Oh, no, you got to go down. I'm sorry, go down. Go down. Okay, here, perfection. Okay, right here, please. Okay. Yeah.
And there may be a human individual who, through his apprehension of the true realities and his joy in what he has apprehended, achieves a state in which he talks with people and is occupied with his bodily necessities, while his intellect is wholly turned toward him.
Meaning God.
May he be exalted, so that in heart he is always in his presence. May he be exalted, while outwardly he is with people in the sort of way described by the poetical parables that have been invented for these notions. I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, and so on.
Okay, let's stop here. So if you have a monastic point of view, and if I understand it the way you intended it in your question, you mean all alone by yourself on a mountaintop or in a monastery. What Maimonides says is you need to be monastic when you're with other people. You're living in a parallel universe, right? Always in his presence. When you're occupied with bodily necessities, intellect is turned towards him. You're living your life, you're doing your job, but you need to be able to, his words are later going to be on automatic pilot. You need to be able at the same time to concentrate and concentrate on God. That's the great struggle. Now, if we'll go on, right, it doesn't happen easily, and only some people are able to do it. So let's read the last part of the paragraph.
I do not say that this rank is that of all prophets, but I do say that this is the rank of Moses, our master. This was also the rank of the patriarchs, the result of whose nearness to him, may he be exalted, was that his name became known to the world through them. Because of the union of their intellects through apprehension of him, it came about that he made a lasting covenant with each of them.
So what he's trying to say here is, you're with other people. You're doing your job. You're being a normal human being. And everybody thinks you're with them, but you're not. You're attached to God. And that's an incredibly difficult task. And only few individuals were able to do it. I just want to say that this phrase is a famous phrase of Maimonides. Just so, it's one of the reasons why I picked it, just so you note it. This quotation, I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, right? You're able to sleep, but my heart wakes. What does that mean? That's his code. That's his code. And what's beautiful about it is, right, you know, kind of like lack of consciousness, the sleep part. Sleep, but you're awake. That's a contradiction. Again, that's one of the mysteries. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So in this particular time when there's a lot of talk about being present in the moment, to really be conscious of what we're doing at this moment and not be thinking of other things, that kind of thought says that as we walk about the world and we notice the trees and the chirping and the snow, and as we look at the other people and we talk to them who are also all these things that are part of the great divine creation, that we really be in that moment and we really be present. So I could imagine a guru of this time saying that is because everything is God's creation, that we are doing what Maimonides says by really being present in this moment and really being aware of everything around us and of the people we're talking to and of the dog barking. And I wonder if Maimonides would say, no, you're not, that those things are not, that God's creation is outside of everything material, everything living. It's an idea.
It's a very good question with several different working parts. I think that there's a jump to make to the pantheistic point of view and to the monastic point of view, which he doesn't take. That's a leap that he does not make. He said that when you observe, and we're going to look at the full text of this in a minute, that as a result of observing the mitzvot, and as a result of studying philosophy, and you go through all of the steps, and you leave your consciousness of your bodily awareness, your corporeality, your bodily functions, when you leave it, you attach to God. But that's almost an impossible task. And that's why most of us don't attach to God. Or very few of us attach to God. And I think the last paragraph here will ultimately clarify it a little bit more. Let's read one more paragraph.
Rabbi, there's a question in the chat that says, what does it mean to be attached to God? Is it practices or adherence to laws?
Oh, it's not it's to be in his. First of all, it's a fantastic question. That's a stumper. That's a fantastic question. I love the question. It is to be able to receive emanations from God. And I'm not able to show that I can explain what the emanations are, not that he does, right? But attaching to God means that God is now communicating with you through pulses or light or visions or dreams. Something's going out from God that you're able to receive. You're able to pick up on it. That's an inadequate answer to a great question. Okay, let's read the last paragraph there.
Yet in the measure in which the faculties of the body are weakened and the fire of the desires are quenched, the intellect is strengthened and its lights achieve a wider extension. Its apprehension is purified and it rejoices in what it apprehends. The result is that when a perfect man is stricken with years and approaches death, this apprehension increases very powerfully. Joy over this apprehension and a great love for the object of apprehension becomes stronger until the soul is separated from the body at that moment in this state of pleasure.
So this is one of the most incredible statements that Maimonides writes. that those who are perfect and those that are getting close to the apprehension of God because they're dying, because all of their bodily functions are weakened, are actually joyous. They're joyous because as their bodily functions decrease and as their sense of corporality declines, they're able to get close to God. And ultimately, Maimonides said that there were only 3 people who were able to let go of their bodily concerns entirely. They were Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And therefore, when they died by getting a kiss from God, because they were able to let go of their sense of corporality. All right, so let's take a pause here. Comments from folks, not just questions, comments. What do you think so far? How does it leave you feel? Yeah, Jerry.
Well, first of all, this sounds a lot like Martin Buber to me, or my I and thou, entering into a dialogue with God. But also, the other point I wanted to make is that I think he's giving too much credit to Moses because Moses was in constant communication with God, not necessarily of his own choosing. He just happened to be, God's messenger, or whatever term you want to call. And wasn't like he chose to find a way to channel God. It was sort of a passive participant in that. Well, he was active, but he was selected, he was spoken to.
Well, Maimonides would say he was because he was perfect. He had the perfect ethical setup, the perfect intellectual setup, and that's why God connected to him. And I like nobody else.
What do you think about Buber?
What do I think about Buber? Standing on one foot.
No, I mean in connection to Maimonides.
Well, if we're going to shorten Buber's philosophy to be about dialogue, I'm not 100% sure that Maimonides would say that these individuals were in dialogue with God. I think maybe more it would need to be said that God was communicating with them in a one-way direction, that God allowed himself, God, to communicate with Moses. And a lot of what Maimonides writes in the Guide to the Perplexed is that the power that God has is not the emanations, but it's the power to withhold an emanation that's directed at someone that might be perfect. And that what God does is decide not for that emanation to go to that person. So it doesn't sound a lot like dialogue. It sounds much more like one-way street. So,
Sorry, Tybee, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Well, a question and comment. I kind of agree with Avi's comment about the way that you connect to God is by doing the mitzvot, which was very much oriented toward people. I don't understand the interpretation which says that you nullify yourself and become so connected to God that you don't see the snow and the trees and the children, that when you appreciate what God has created, you're connecting with God. I don't see it as like Jerry also mentioned, like we're not supposed to live a monastic life. We're supposed to be connected to people and get the joy of it. And that's how we best connect to Hashem. Am I misunderstanding something?
I would say that I appreciate that, and Maimonides would not necessarily agree. So again, that's one of the reasons why we do these texts. Going to see another point of view, and maybe it sort of changes the way we see the world. Yeah, Debbie.
As I read some of the initial paragraphs, it suggested to me that this is much the reasoning that the Catholic Church does for celibacy among priests. And I was just curious if there has ever been that kind of connection there.
So a couple of nuances.
Mhm.
One, we're together for a very short amount of time looking at my edited selections of Maimonides. So that brings, first of all, I'm trying to make a point. So I self-selected texts, number one. I think we're going to see from the next section of text that we look at that it's a journey. And everything that we've been talking about is part of the journey. The destination is our own individual personal attachment to God. That doesn't allow for other people. That doesn't mean we're looking at the sunset over the lake at camp. It's just the individual and God. But that's such a hard thing to get to that very few people actually get there. But the goal is the pure relationship with God. Taiba, your face says everything, totally says everything, which is fine, right? Because personally, I'm not going to get there. Right? Since I'm not going to get there, I'm still going to be doing the mitzvot. I'm still going to be going down to the lake and reciting Havdalah, right? So I'm not losing it because I'm not getting there, okay? You may think I'm going to get there, or you may hope I get there, or as the rabbi, I should get there, but I'm not getting there because I'm imperfect. I know I'm imperfect, right? And that's why we still have mitzvot. And that's why that text before was important, is one way to look at it. We're constantly in training in order to get there. Yes, Avi.
What confuses me about this idea of apprehension is that I had thought that in the Mishneh Torah, he basically says, look, there's these different levels, and the angels are at the highest level, and they can have an ability to understand God. But as you go down the different levels, humans just aren't capable. We don't have the language or the minds or the facility to understand the divine in any way. And maybe Moses has some ability.
Whoa. The key word in what you just said was understand. That's the key word. We don't understand God. We can't understand God. Our language is limited. Our texts are limited. Our minds are limited, but not the ability to attach. That is not an intellectual experience. That's the difference.
And so he would say that it's through the mitzvot and through all these other things that he mentioned that we will train that part of our souls that learns about attaching to attach.
It's going to happen. It's going to be, aha. We're going to cross over to another plateau. We're working our entire lives to get there. And then God has to allow us in. That's the word, that's why emanation, because God controls who gets in. We may do all the steps, we may do all the right training, and not get there because God doesn't let us in.
Nancy?
So, I mean, it sounds almost like you're saying that to do mitzvot is not to do mitzvot to make the world a better place, but to do it more for a selfish reason, which is so that we get to know God, which seems kind of the opposite of what I would have expected. I would think you're supposed to do mitzvot more as out of selflessness as opposed to selfishness.
Well, that's why Maimonides is such a powerful figure. So first of all, he's not going to say no to what you just said, but he's going to say that there's a priority. And actually, let's go back to the text, John. There's one, because I'm going to show you a summary by Moshe Habertal of what we've all just said. All right, scroll up. Great. Okay. Someone else want to read that? Nancy, do you want to read here? Just this was right on your point.
See if I can. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can. Okay. So number one or number one?
Start from the climax here. This is from Moshe Habertal's book, Maimonides' Life and Thought. I just quoted from one page in there because I thought it summed up very well where we are at this point before we go back to the text. So this is a good summary of everything we've just learned.
The climax of the guide is a description of 4 perfections in mounting order of excellence. The 4 perfections are: 1, the perfection of possessions, such as money, land, a house, and clothing, pertains to things that are not really connected with what a person is. Being a great king belongs to this kind of perfection. Most pleasure from these things is purely imaginary, and they have no permanence. Even if they remain forever, a person cannot achieve through them perfection of self. Okay.
Right. Level 1, perfection of level 1. Okay. Get as many possessions as you possibly can, but know that that's imaginary in terms of their permanence. Next level.
The perfection of the body's constitution and shape, its harmonious temperament and well-proportioned and strong limbs, is more closely linked to the person's self. Yet this perfection, being corporeal, pertains to man, not as man, but as animal, and it does not touch the soul. Well, that
So this is Maimonides as doctor,
okay.
Right? Where he has all kinds of suggestions about how to live a healthy life,
Okay.
Drink lots of water, go to art museums, okay, take care of yourself. Okay, now Nancy, number 3 is what you were suggesting.
Okay, the perfection of the ethical virtues exists to a great extent in the individual self. One's moral habits reach their ultimate excellence. Most of the commandments have as their aim this kind of perfection, but it is not an end in itself. The disposition to be useful to people is always for someone else. One cannot be virtuous on one's own.
So I think, Nancy, that this is what you were saying, right? Is in order to know how to be a good person, you need to be with other people, right? You need something to be opposite you to see how you are doing. The key line is, though, it's not an end in itself.
Not an end in itself.
Okay, now, last paragraph, please.
The true human perfection resides in the rational virtues and belongs to the person alone. It is permanent, and through it, a person is human. You ought to strive to attain this perfection that remains permanently with you, And do not weary and trouble yourself for the sake of others, O you who neglect your own soul, so that its whiteness has turned into blackness, though corporeal faculties having gained domination over it. So is that saying, like, if you're only, it's kind of like if you're only doing, is that, not to get too involved in doing mitzvot just for the sake of doing mitzvot, you'll lose yourself?
Yeah, right. Knowing that the point is to connect to God.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
To go to that. Okay. So we're now got to the point. So I'm now going to share with you the most beautiful text from the Guide to the Perplexed that Maimonides wrote. It's going to talk about his religious journey. It's going to talk about our religious journey. It's going to take all the things that we've discussed so far and put it into a parable. So let's ask a couple of questions first. Okay. Why a parable? Why does he just not say, okay, here's a paragraph, and like, as opposed to like explains it right away? Why does he do it to a parable? Or why might he thought of using a parable?
It's easier to remember.
Easy to remember? Yeah, Polly?
I know the best professors teach the same thing in different ways because it helps different people understand better.
Right, people learn different ways. Some people learn direct, some people learn indirect. Great. Yep. Any other possibilities? At the end, I had planned this, but we're probably not going to get to it. We might do it some other time. Is part of the Guide to the Perplexed is about what's hidden and what's revealed, what's in and what's out. And he's constantly playing with it. There's a whole question, is he trying to hide or is he trying to reveal? Which is very common style of writing at this time in Spain. But remember, he's teaching philosophy. And teaching philosophy was considered dangerous. So if you taught it directly, there might be consequences that you didn't want, like people would leave the religion. Also remember that we asked the question in the beginning, was this for the elite or was this for the common person? This way it could be for the elite, because only the elite were going to understand the parable. So it's a lot about hiding. What do you reveal and what do you hide? The parable is going to be about a palace. Going to start in a city, outside the walls of the city. You're going to go into the city. You're then going to go through the city. Then you're going to get to the walls of the palace, and you're going to go into the palace. I think my question about that is, that journey is horizontal. If we're talking about God, why is the journey not vertical? Like going up one level, next level, getting to God. Why is the journey, what's the symbolism of journey that goes horizontal as opposed to vertical? Yes. Moto power. Please, unmute, please.
Harriet, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
No, okay. So you're talking about the difference maybe in meaning between vertical and horizontal. What occurs to me is you also describe this voyage as a travel into a palace. And I am wondering about the symbolism of the palace. Is it not the being of God that we are entering into? it doesn't really address your particular question of whether or not God's existence is vertical or horizontal. You ask nonetheless for the symbolism, the importance of the travel being horizontal. And I say it is going into the palace, which belongs to God. Probably to Maimonides, it represents the corporeal, if we could, aspect of God, the existence of God.
So in your metaphor, your understanding of the metaphor, which is easier, the horizontal journey or the vertical journey?
I would never be able to say that one is better than another, but I could say that from my understanding of Maimonides, it wouldn't make any difference whether the journey was horizontal or vertical. In his understanding, God is an all-encompassing entity.
Okay. Here's my guess. I mean, right, this is my guess, is it's one of the ways that Maimonides is trying to say that this journey is for everybody. That the horizontal journey, although difficult, which we'll see, is easier than the vertical journey. Ascending to heaven sounds much more like what angels do. Hierarchically, right? Going up on the different levels. On the other hand, horizontally, that's much more approachable by everyone. So I think it's a way of saying that it's everybody's task. It's not easy, but it's everybody's task. I'm not sure, but I do think that it's a way of leaving angels out of the picture, for which he wasn't predisposed to put them in. He also was from Cordoba. Anyone been to Cordoba? What's the single most beautiful thing in Cordoba? Well, I got to make sure that it's in Cordoba. Where is the Alhambra Palace?
That's what I was thinking of, Alhambra.
Where is it? Is it in Cordoba?
I don't know, but it's somewhere in that area of cities in southern Andalusia.
Right. So the scholars around Maimonides say that that was his model for this parable, was the palace. And often when you see diagrams of the intricate rooms in the Alhambra and the kind of maze. Polly, have you been in the Alhambra?
I have. It is spectacular.
What's it like to be inside as you wander through?
Well, actually, certain little parts of it were made into church areas over the years.
Elliot?
First, the bad news. The Alhambra's in Granada.
Yeah.
Number two, the good news. I've been in it. It's magnificent. It is kind of cosmic. The place is kind of cosmic. So I can see where he could get that. But maybe that's where he got it from seeing it.
Well,
there's also an amazing mosque in Cordoba. That's beyond amazing. That has the church in the middle of it, which is totally bizarre. But that came later, I think.
Right. So
they conquered it.
I'm sorry, say again?
No.
It isn't bizarre that the Christians conquered it and converted it from a mosque to a church, but it is stupendously beautiful.
Right. It's the Alcazar. Cordoba is the Alcazar.
I think
and it was a mosque, and it was then made it into a church. Okay.
Cordoba has the mesquite, which is the largest mosque in the world, or at least at its time.
At its time.
Yeah.
But that's in Cordoba.
So I'm not sure which one it is, right? But certainly not a surprise that he modeled this parable on a magnificent Arabic architectural structure, which were known for the question of hidden versus revealed, right? Walls around beautiful places. So it looks, you don't know what's inside, and all of a sudden you turn the corner and there's something magnificent inside. Okay, John, let's now read the parable. Okay. Okay, someone would like to read?
I can read if you want.
Okay, please. Thanks, Jerry.
Now I shall interpret to you this parable that I have invented. I say then, those who are outside the city are all human individuals who have no doctrinal belief, neither one based on speculation nor one that accepts the authority of tradition. Such individuals as the furthermost Turks in the remote north, the Negroes found in the remote south, and those who resemble them from among them that are with us in these climes. The status of those is like that of irrational animals. To my mind, they do not have the rank of men, but have among the beings a rank lower than the rank of man, but higher than the rank of apes. For they have the external shape and lineaments of a man and a faculty of discernment that is superior to that of the apes. Those who are within the city, but have turned their backs
No, stop there. Stop there.
Oh.
That's good. So he's certainly not politically correct. Okay. But what I want to note about the first level here, and certainly if you think about about 25 divrei Torah that I've given in the 8 months I've here, this has been my theme. One of the themes that I've spoken about many times, and is certainly pervasive in Hasidic thought. What is the basic line that we say about human beings? We say that every human being is created in God's image, right? That there's something divine in everyone. Maimonides, again, is not politically correct. He's not nice. He's highly critical of people. And here he says, the lowest level of folks have no notion of the existence of God. They don't believe in God. Nothing good to say about them. They're going to that. So there are people, right, that don't believe in God. And he's highly critical. Okay. Where are they? Jerry, where are they? Where are these people in the parable?
North and south.
Well, those are the people, right, right. But in the parable, they're not in the parable. But where are they exactly? They're outside the walls.
Oh, okay.
They're outside the city walls. Okay, let's go on. Where are we now? Second rank. There are going to be 7 levels, by the way. 7 levels. Not an insignificant number, right? 7, right? In Hechalot literature, Shabbat, 7 appears, right? 7, not a coincidence. It's got 7 levels. Pali, I've not been in the palace. I'm sure it's got more than 7 rooms. It probably has 7,000 rooms, right? But okay, second level, okay.
Those who are within the city but have turned their backs upon the ruler's habitation are people who have opinions and are engaged in speculation, but who have adopted incorrect opinions, either because of some great error that befell them in the course of their speculation, or because of their following the traditional authority of one who had fallen into error. Accordingly, because of these opinions, the more these people walk, the greater their distance from the ruler's habitation. And they are far worse than the first. They are those concerning whom the necessity at certain times impels killing them and blotting out the traces of their opinions, lest they should lead astray the ways of others.
Okay, well, it's a little polemical. It's a little polemical, right? So first of all, where are they? Are they outside the walls?
Within the city.
Now they're inside the city. And which direction are they walking?
Away.
Right. So they got their back to the inside to where the palace is. So the more they walk, the further they go away from the inner sanctum. And they have a notion, but it's incorrect. Incorrect. Right. And they're dangerous. So they might be killed. Okay. The parable continues. Level 3. We're getting closer.
Those who seek to reach the ruler's habitation and to enter it, but never see the ruler's habitation or the multitude of the adherents of the law, I refer to the ignoramuses who observe the commandments.
Okay. He is so delicate in his language. He is so using poetry, not that you could guess about who these people are. Right. So who are these folks? This is level 3. They're committed Jews. They observe mitzvot. But what do they not know? What do they not know? What are they ignorant of? You've been studying with me now for 3 hours. What do they not know?
Well, they're not connecting.
But what do they not know? This is knowledge. Right now it's knowledge. What do they not know? Philosophy. They don't not study philosophy. They're not doing philosophical inquiry. They're observant Jews. They don't know a lot about, again, they're not knowledgeable Jews. They're observant Jews. And they don't know philosophy. Again, it's a parable. This is level 3. Okay, level 4.
Those who have come up to the habitation and walk around it are the jurists who believe true opinions on the basis of traditional authority and study the law concerning the practices of divine service, but do not engage in speculation concerning the fundamental principles of religion and make no inquiry whatever regarding the rectification of belief.
So who are these folks? What's the difference between those in the prior category? In the prior category, they observed, but didn't know a lot about Judaism. These know Judaism.
These are scholarly intellectuals that are concerning themselves with what he doesn't consider the most important path that, you know, you need to concern yourself with.
But they're knowledgeable Jews. Again, they've not yet studied philosophy, but they're studying Jewish law.
Right.
A good thing, but not, well, theoretically a good thing.
So they're not perplexed. These are not the.
Correct. Nice. Correct. They're not perplexed. Excellent. Excellent. Yes. Okay. Next group. Number 5. We're getting close. We're getting there. Okay.
Those who have plunged into speculation concerning the fundamental principles of religion have entered the antechambers. People there indubitably have different ranks. He, however, who has achieved demonstration to the extent that that is possible of everything that may be demonstrated, and who has ascertained in divine matters to the extent that that is possible, everything that may be ascertained, and who has come close to certainty in those matters in which one can only come close to it, has come to be with the ruler in the inner part of the habitation.
Okay, they're now inside the palace. They're in the palace. And he says they have achieved demonstration. That's code. That means they've started to study philosophy. So these are people who know Jewish, who are observant, they're knowledgeable Jews, and now have started to study. They were asking questions. There's one more technical term here, which takes us back to everything we studied earlier in this hour and last week, where it says, to the extent that is possible. That's code for Tamei mitzvot. That's all of what we have been looking at about the rules for, or the meanings behind the mitzvot. They're asking all those questions. Why do we do this mitzvah? And this is why we do this mitzvah. So they're on the path. Knowledgeable Jews, observant Jews, asking questions about philosophy. Okay, number 6. And here, pay attention as to what's the difference between level 5 and level 6, because we're getting very close.
Know, my son, that as long as you are engaged in studying the mathematical sciences and the art of logic, you are one of those who walk around.
I lost you, Jerry.
Debbie Friedman, would you mind picking up the reading? I don't know what happened to Jerry.
I'll start from the beginning because it was the middle of that sentence. Know, my son, that as long as you are engaged in studying the mathematical sciences and the art of logic, you are one of those who walk around the house searching for escape. As the sages, may their memory be blessed, have said, resorting to the parable, Ben Zoma is still outside. If, however, you have achieved perfection in the natural things and have understood divine science, you have entered into the ruler's place, into the inner court, and are with him in one habitation. This is the rank of the men of science. They, however, are of different grades of perfection.
Okay, so what's the difference between this group and the prior group? Prior group started to ask questions. What did this group achieve?
Knowledge.
What kind of knowledge?
Well, of science.
Right, they completed the course. They went to Princeton and graduated. They graduated, right? They're not freshmen anymore. They graduated. They took the whole course. So, right, now, want to reread, right? It says, know, my son, that as long as you are engaged in studying the mathematical sciences and the art of logic, you are one of those who walk around the house searching for the gate. How do you get to the gate? Not by observing mitzvot, not by being a knowledgeable Jew. You get to the gate by having completed the course in philosophy. Okay.
Wait, before you go, but is it enough to do, like, but he wouldn't say you would achieve that if you didn't also do the mitzvot and also do the observation. You need all of it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But as a form of literature or reading a text, he doesn't say that. You're right. I totally agree with you. But he's emphasizing, right? And the other places, by the way, I had edited all of the texts, right? Took them out of context, changed the order. Here we got the complete parable. I didn't take anything out. So to your very good point, he could have put that in, but he's emphasizing how key philosophy is. All right. If we have a drum roll, now we're going to read the punchline. John, can I have a drum roll, please? Okay. Nancy, let's read the punchline, number 7.
There are those who set their thought to work after having attained perfection in the divine science, turn wholly toward God, may he be cherished and held sublime, renounce what is other than he, and direct all the acts of their intellect toward an examination of the beings with a view to drawing from them proof with regard to him, so as to know his governance of them in whatever way it is possible. These people are those who are present in the ruler's council. This is the rank of the prophets. Among them, there is he who, because of the greatness of his apprehension and renouncing everything that is other than God, may he be exalted, has attained such a degree that it is said of him, and he was there with the Lord, putting questions and receiving answers, speaking and being spoken to in that holy place. And because of his great joy in that which he apprehended, he did neither eat bread nor drink water. For his intellect attained such strength that all the gross faculties in the body ceased to function. I refer to the various kinds of the sense of touch. Some prophets could only see, some of them from close by and some from afar, as a prophet says, from afar the Lord appeared unto me.
So now they're in the presence of God. Okay, we can put away the screen share so we could see everybody, John. Great. Okay, so saying that ultimately there are very few folks who get to this place. Some of the prophets and Moses, their apprehension of God, meaning they're in the, and it's kind of like a leap that takes place. So I'll pause there. Comments, observations, please. Yeah, Nancy, please.
Well, a bunch of things, but for the use of the word apprehension, he keeps using it. So apprehension has a number of different meanings. So in this context, do you mean like apprehending, understanding? Is that what apprehension means in this context?
I actually think it's a pun.
Okay.
That apprehension is understanding, yes, but meaning fulfilled. That you're able to feel God's presence. You're apprehending God's presence. If you do all of these things and you do it the right way, puff, something happens.
So the other thing is going back to what Avi had said earlier. I mean, when you get to the seventh level, it sounds either like you're in the Zen state or you're in heaven, which means you're not alive. So not like, because if you don't need food or drink, I mean, so.
I think no, you're not in heaven, you're on earth, but you don't have your corporeal needs anymore.
Well, isn't that kind of Zenish? Isn't that kind of going back to what people were saying before?
Okay, I don't disagree. I'm not.
Rabbi,
I don't know enough about the technicalities of Zen to be able to say yes or no to that.
There's a question in the chat. Can the reference to Ben Zoma in level 6 be explained?
Yeah, it probably can be explained, but I have to look it up. So I don't know. I don't know.
Harriet?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. I think it was Nancy who well, we've mentioned the use of the word apprehension. It's occurred to me, if I understand the writings of Maimonides, even sort of vaguely correctly, it seemed to me that he used the word apprehension in the context of a man fearing death while also anticipating it with some sort of joy, which also brought to mind my understanding or interpretation that a man who faced death would eventually reach the point where he wanted it just to be over with. He would want to let go of his life. So when we talk about the word apprehension, which is used multiple times in all of these writings, I see Maimonides in a questionable light, whereas before this I hadn't. I mean, he was a physician, period, and a leader of the Jews. But in these writings, he strikes me as somehow needing to negate the humanness that we want to believe is part of our lives and is enlivened and brought to life by our mitzvot. In these writings, we see Maimonides, at least to my mind, as somebody who wants man in general, and maybe himself, to transcend all of that and to be in this connection with God, which in a way makes him a little bit less than human. So I just mentioned this as an observation this is from the writings that he calls the Guide to the Perplexed. So it seems to me that he is one of the perplexed people in his writings.
So Harriet, were you with us last week?
No, unfortunately I wasn't. I would have
Good,
been.
okay, because that's exactly how I started.
Oh.
So I agree with you, is that there is a debate as to why he wrote the Guide to the Perplexed. Is it this? So remember that the first book he wrote at the age of 16 was called The Age of either The Age of Logic or The Act of Logic, which became a logic textbook used by Jews and Muslims alike. And that was the first book he wrote. And the second book he wrote was a medical volume, which organized all of the medical thinking current in the Arab world at the time. So again, the same thing he did for the Mishnah Torah, he did for philosophy and he did for medicine, or he did for secular philosophy, not Jewish philosophy. That is not the Guide to the Perplexed. It is not a well-organized book. It is not a book where you open the table of contents and say, what does he say about prophecy? I turn here. What about the problem of evil? Where's that? He discusses all those things, but it's hard to find. So he didn't do that. So my understanding of this, along with people like Ivry from New York University, Isidore Ivry, it's not a heuristic text. It's not meant to be used for educational purposes, but rather it is, in his own way, his personal religious journey of where he wants to go. And he writes it as a public document, because that's what you did in those days. That's what you did in the 12th century and the 13th century. That's how you wrote philosophy. It was a personal journey. He had to hide it. That's why it's esoteric. That's why it's not well organized. But yes, it's his own struggle for how to get to God. And that's why the parable is a really good summary of all of it. Number one, it's not a clear path. It's a maze. Sometimes you take wrong turns. Study Jewishly, study philosophy. That's one of the things that I love about Maimonides the most. And it's why I'm not an Orthodox rabbi. This is the most serious statement I'm going to make in this entire 2 days of learning together. It is why I'm not an Orthodox rabbi. Because I cannot ignore philosophy. And I cannot ignore all of the intellectual curiosities that are out there about Judaism and who wrote the Bible and all of those things. You need to know those things. And that's why Maimonides is perplexed. It's why I'm perplexed. It may be why you are perplexed, because it's no easy path to put it all together. And Maimonides says it's a maze. Know where you want to get, which is inside. And there are multiple paths to get there. It's not easy. And he's saying, I'm struggling too. Remember, this is the guy who's got no humility. This is the guy who knows he wrote a Mishnah Torah that has 15,000 halachot in it. And he said, I'm perplexed. So if he can be perplexed, you and I can be perplexed. I find great comfort in that, right? And he also says, ask all those questions. Don't shy away from them. You may not know an answer, okay, but ask the question. Go and do that.
Avi, did you have a question?
Yeah, so following up on your comment, why you're not an Orthodox rabbi, I'm thinking about something I heard from a conservative rabbi 50 years ago. And it was along the lines that trying to encourage young Jews to become conservative rabbis and to go to JTS and to study with Heschel or Kaplan or in that model, in that tradition. And this idea that if you didn't believe in God, if you were agnostic, or if you had no idea what God was, that was no impotent. Is that the right word? That you should go, and it would be okay, even if you went to JDS and became a rabbi and didn't believe in God. Through your work as a rabbi, you would eventually come to understand and apprehend God, and it would be okay. In the end, you would become a Jewish rabbi who had a connection to God. And I'm struggling with how Maimonides would think about that, given the first levels where if you don't believe in God, there's nowhere for you to go. And yet I know that this rabbi strongly believed that it was not a problem for you to follow that path in a Kaplan-esque way, and you would find God.
Several different, Nancy, buckets in that. Okay. So first of all, my guess is 50 years ago, and the way that you describe that rabbi, I'm sure that rabbi was or I would guess that rabbi is a Reconstructionist. And what that no? Okay.
He was conservative rabbi, but I'm sure he certainly was probably trained by Kaplan.
Well, I mean, as big as the tent is, so first of all, he might have recommended that person go to rabbinical school. I'm not sure rabbinical school would have accepted him, right? Because you need to write an essay in which you describe your religious philosophy. So it's been a while since I served on the admissions committee, which I did from time to time, but there's always going to be a conversation about God. I think one of the things that I'll say a little bit about JTS, which is one of the things that's changed about JTS in 50 years is 50 years ago, it was a place where you could often be a starter on your religious journey. And by the time you finished rabbinical school 6 or 7 years later, you would be in a different place. And that was okay with rabbinical school. That's not the case anymore. So it's in a different place and it sort of changed. But I would say the following, and the real answer to your question, Avi, which is, there are many, as a rabbi, now I talk as a rabbi and as an educator. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me how you get there. I think there are multiple paths to God. And I would see my role as a rabbi is enabling the creation as many of those paths as possible. And if one of those paths is, okay, you're not sure about God or you got questions about God, okay, start doing mitzvot and you will find meaning in the mitzvot that might get you there, very much so. And now I'll give a plug for the Dvar Torah that I wrote for this Shabbat, which I just finished this morning. It's sort of connected to this. So you should all go and read, or I both wrote it and I'll videotape it later, but it sort of addresses this issue in a way. So I'll put a plug in for that. You might want to look at that because it's sort of on that topic. But I want to return this more back to Maimonides, which is, here you see the greatness of Maimonides. You see, he was a traditional Jew, living in a traditional Jewish environment with great intellectual honesty. He didn't shy away from great questions, great students, philosophy, all the things that made life hard. We did a lot of work here about Tamei Mitzvot. Tamei Mitzvot, the reasons for the commandments. It's one of the most controversial parts of Judaism. Because as we said, Jerry, back in the beginning, you were right on, and your example was the perfect example. As soon as you talk about the reasons, someone can argue with you. I don't like that reason. And if you're a so-so rabbi and you only got 2 reasons, and you got a very bright student, maybe they counter both your arguments. And the student says, I'm not going to observe that mitzvah, you lose. It is much safer, much, much safer not to be intellectually honest and not to put out the reasons for the mitzvot and say, observe. If you don't observe, something bad is going to happen. Observe, God will love you. That's a much easier theology, much easier. He's taken the hardest road, which is we're going to explain all of these things. We're going to do our best to explain all of these things. And no question is out of bounds. No science is out of bounds. No book is out of bounds. He's a medieval rabbi that says you can access every book. There's wisdom every place. That's why I love him. Yes, Nancy.
Well, but you could question everything, but it sounds from that parable that we read that you can't question that there's God, because otherwise you're really outside the gate. So he's not really talking to them, no?
Well, you could ask questions. You could ask you can ask the question, did God do this miracle? You can ask this question, does God know your thoughts? You could ask all those questions about God. Ask them.
Accept that there's God, because he seemed to have put the people who don't, I mean, I don't know if he was talking about people who are not of monotheistic religions. I mean, I don't know exactly who he was putting outside the gates there, but you have to be inside the gates to participate in this.
Yes. Yeah. You got to believe, that's the starting point. Yes. But you could ask all the questions. Did God create in time? Was the creation ex nihilo? Was it like Aristotle and eternity? You could ask all those difficult questions. And we may not know the answers, or I might not be able to teach you the answer, or you may not be able to understand the answer, but let's ask all the questions.
I mean, if all of this has to do with Greek philosophy, but they didn't believe in God. I mean, they believed in gods, I suppose. But I mean, where is there, where's the connection from Greek philosophy to the mitzvot?
Well, that you'll have to invite me back for, because that's a whole other course. What he's saying is that they correlate, right? He argues again, about the esoteric and the exoteric nature of the guide is there are those who argue, which I don't agree with, but there are those that argue that Maimonides was very much a Greek philosopher and not a Jewish philosopher. I don't buy that, and neither does most modern scholars, neither does Micha Goodman and Moshe Habertal, the two people we reference the most here. But if you go back to the 1930s, and Leo Strauss at the University of Chicago said that Maimonides was an atheist. So
I mean,
all based on reading,
but I
all
mean,
based on reading the Guide for the Perplexed. So this is a way of saying that this is a great, if not inscrutable, book of the Jewish tradition. It's not a fun read. And if you want to know more, probably Micha Goodman's book is probably the best way in because it's a readable book. But Maimonides is one of my favorites because he's a rationalist. I'll end with the following statement, which I wish I said when I applied to rabbinical school, but I didn't. When I came into rabbinical school, I walked in, I carried two books. On one hand, I carried Heschel, and the other hand, I carried Kaplan, and I said, these are my two teachers. I believe in both of these people. And they weren't so sure whether they wanted me to go to rabbinical school or not. What I should have said was, I brought the Moreh Nevuchim in one hand and the Mishnah Torah in the other. And I should have said that Maimonides, he's the ideal conservative Jew. That's what I would, now if I interviewed, that's what I would have said. So, and that's what I believe about Maimonides, is that he was a conservative Jew. And we should embrace him that way, because he accepts both tradition and modernity, both the riches of the Jewish tradition and other sources of information to go and do that. I'm going to conclude with that and say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
so much.